Delta has re-intensified to become yet again a major Category 3 system, with the models proving true and accurate ahead of an expected Louisiana landfall Friday evening. Our meteorologists are live to break down the latest data from the NHC and answer your questions here live on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, everybody. JB Buno here with you live on the left side of your screen in your hurricane headquarters, being joined by friend of the program, KNWA Chief Meteorologist Dan Scoff, joining us from Northwest Arkansas. Very curious to hear what he has to say as Delta gets a little bit closer to the Louisiana coast. We want to remind you that you can use the hashtags on your screen. Hashtag Hey Dan, hashtag Hey JB, and the third member of our team, hashtag Hey Amanda. Meteorologist Amanda Holly is about to join us here live at the wall. Again, we'll be looking for your questions and answering them here live in about 5 minutes time. But standing by at the wall is Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Amanda Holly here with the latest, the 5 o'clock advisory coming down moments ago from the NHC. Hey Amanda.
Hey JB, so we have now a major Category 3 hurricane. This was not unexpected, maybe a little sooner, but otherwise it now has maximum winds there of 115 miles per hour, now moving northwest at 12 miles per hour. So we're expecting that decrease in forward motion to continue. Earlier we were looking at those that movement at 14 miles per hour. So it's come down a couple of miles per hour over the past couple of hours here, but I wanted to zoom right in on visible satellite. Of course, we're losing the daylight here, but this system just looks a lot better than it did 12 hours ago. And I was talking with JB just a few minutes before we came on stream and saying how it looks impressive and we will likely see this storm strengthen. And that's exactly what happened as the 5 o'clock advisory. The hurricane hunters, they're in there. They found those stronger winds. They also found the pressure getting lower, which of course indicates a stronger storm as well. So it is expected to continue to make landfall right where we thought it was going to, in the southwestern portion of the Louisiana coastline. The National Hurricane Center noting that weakening before landfall is still possible, but I will say, I'm looking at this cone now, and by 2 o'clock tomorrow, we could be looking at an even stronger Category 3 storm with maybe some weakening right before landfall. And then this will be tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening. That's the time frame that we're looking at this point. Of course, the conditions along the Louisiana coastline and in southern Louisiana going to go downhill pretty much tomorrow morning. When you guys wake up, you're probably going to be experiencing some gusty winds, some of those outer rain bands that are going to start to move through, and then of course conditions continuing to deteriorate as we go through the afternoon. Now the storm will weaken very fast after it moves onshore and then continue to weaken as it makes its way toward the Tennessee River Valley there, and then we will be talking about just some moisture lingering as it moves across the mid-Atlantic states. But models continue to be in very good agreement on where this storm is going. I know a lot of questions probably going to come in about what are the chances that it shifts this far east or this far west. I'll tell you, these models have been locked in for several days, and that gives us very high confidence where this storm is going. Of course, this is where the center of the storm is going to track, but we're talking about those impacts being far-reaching from that center. We've been talking about the past couple of days about the storm growing in physical size, and that's what we've seen as well. Now we're talking about those tropical storm force winds extending out 160 miles from the center of the storm, whereas just a few hours ago, the 2 o'clock advisory, those winds were extending out, the tropical storm force winds extending out 125 miles from the center of the storm. So those winds continue to get wider. That wind radii continues to expand. So we are going to see those impacts far-reaching from the center. We have those hurricane warnings in effect from High Island, Texas to Morgan City, Louisiana, and that's this pink shade here. And then the orange shade is tropical storm warnings, and that's where we expect those tropical storm force winds, which could be anywhere from 39 miles per hour all the way up to 73 miles per hour. So we'll be watching for that. There is a good chance, though, that most of the coastline of Louisiana, some coastline of Texas, and maybe into portions of Mississippi there, and maybe into Alabama, that we will see at least tropical storm force winds. We also have storm surge warnings, watches and warnings in effect, because as we know, we are going to see those winds start to make their way they're going to push that water as the storm gets closer to shore. That the winds are going to push that water closer up on land. So we'll be talking about those storm surge warnings from High Island, Texas to Ocean Springs, Mississippi, obviously. Sorry about that. We had a little bit of a graphics issue. Now, the highest amounts are going to be about 7 to 11 feet, which, as we know, if you're comparing this to Hurricane Laura, that's not quite as high as Hurricane Laura was forecast to be. And that's because this storm is not as strong as Hurricane Laura was, nor is it quite as big. So we are talking about the highest storm surge being from somewhere between the Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge and Port Fourchon. And that's the, I messed it up earlier. I probably just messed it up again too, but that is just west of Grand Isle, Louisiana. That's where we expect the highest storm surge to be. We're also going to be talking about these rainfall totals. However, the rainfall totals aren't going to be quite as high in as many spots with this one because we're going to be talking about a pretty fast moving storm. So a wide swath of 6 to maybe 10 inches possible here in this purple shaded area, and then maybe some localized amounts up to 15 inches. But otherwise, this storm's not going to be around for very long for it to dump a lot of rainfall. The highest amounts are going to be kind of right where that center moves by. They're already dealing, Louisiana, Mississippi, the coastline, the panhandle of Florida even, already dealing with some of this outer, deeper tropical moisture on the northern side of the system. They're already dealing with some very heavy rain in Louisiana, unfortunately, and it's only going to get worse as the night goes on tonight, and when we wake up in the morning, those conditions really starting to deteriorate. But the latest 5 o'clock advisory here, those maximum winds at 115 miles per hour, which puts this back at a Category 3, a major hurricane. JB?
Meteorologist Amanda Holly joining us here at the wall with the very latest here on Hurricane Delta. Appreciate it, Amanda. I want to bring in Dan Scoff. And as a reminder here, folks, use the hashtags that we have here on your screen. You can use hashtag Hey Amanda. Amanda's going to be sitting down with us to answer your questions here in just a moment, as well as Dan Scoff, KNWA Chief Meteorologist, joining us from Northwest Arkansas. Not necessarily right in the path of this storm. Might see some of the outer impacts of it, of course, and we're going to be hearing from Dan here momentarily, but use the hashtags on your screen, hashtag Hey Dan, hashtag Hey JB, hashtag Hey Amanda. We're going to start to throw questions here up on screen momentarily to answer them here live. Dan, the 5 o'clock advisory, noteworthy to you in what way?
Strengthening, and that's exactly what happened. Also, what also is noteworthy to me was a 30 nautical mile wide eye. So that means that this is widened a little bit. Originally, when it was a pinhole eye, just a little bit, southeast of the Yucatan Peninsula, when it made landfall close to Cancun, it was a very small storm. I mean, the swath of hurricane winds are very narrow. Now they have increased in size. So that's one thing that tells me that this has gone through a couple of eye wall replacement cycles. The visible satellite imagery is showing definitely a definitive eye that's starting to clear. And so these are all signs that this storm is strengthening. And something to mention too is, Amanda talked about how the Category 3 might be a little bit earlier than expected. We have to remember too, and we talked about this last time with Laura, is that intensity forecasts from computer models, they definitely struggle. Tracks are pretty good, and they have a good idea. And as you talked about earlier with Joe and Amanda, that the tracks have pretty much locked down to central Louisiana. But the intensity has been a little bit of a struggle. Now, it's gotten the re-intensification as it moved north of the Yucatan, but those are some of the things that really stand out. And then if you look at the discussion, they talked about 700 millibar flight level winds at around 120 knots. So, and they were talking about the SFMR, the measurements that, these hurricane hunters experience, about 90 knots wind estimate. So, and the pressure has dropped too. When that pressure drops, for those that don't know a lot about hurricanes, when the pressure drops, it takes just a little bit while for your wind to respond, but a falling pressure indicates a deepening low, which of course means a strengthening hurricane. So those are, I think, the three takeaways: a widening eye, Category 3, that's going to catch a lot of people's attention. And even if it does weaken to a Category 2, that storm surge, that wall of water has to go somewhere. And I think that took a lot of people off guard with some of the previous hurricanes that, since it just gets downgraded, that water still has to go somewhere. So that's something important to remember.
And we were just notified a moment ago, shout out to our friends over at WKRG in Mobile, Alabama. They have a shot here for us from Lake Charles. Take a look at this. This is live here, everybody, on your screen. So this is an area, again, Amanda, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but this is an area that we understand is seeing some evacuations.
Near Cameron, Louisiana, which of course is exactly where Hurricane Laura came ashore. But Lake Charles, I'd imagine that they're going through these evacuations. I know lots of folks still not even able to get back to their homes that they were originally evacuated from because they're still working those repairs. So unfortunate situation there. But yeah, you can already see those swells coming in, and those swells are only going to get larger over the next 24 to 36 hours as Delta makes its approach to the coast.
All right, we are now going to open up the meteorologist Q&A portion here, everybody, on Tracking the Tropics. If you've been with us here before, you know how this works. If you're new to the program, allow me just a moment to explain. Use the hashtags on the right side of your screen underneath each one of our names. Hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Dan, hashtag Hey JB. In the Facebook Live comment section, across multiple Facebook pages, especially in the impact area like KLFY, WGNO, we're going to be looking for those questions to pose directly to the experts here, those experts being Amanda and Dan, of course, the meteorologist here with invaluable experience tracking hurricanes. And we'll put your comments up here on screen, such as the first comment that we have, and an important one from Nora Thayer here. As much as we are honed in on Delta, hashtag Hey Amanda, are there any other storms out there?
It's a great question, Nora. I was just double checking the National Hurricane Center website, and it does look like there's a tropical wave that just came off the coast of Africa. They're now highlighting it has a 20% chance of developing over the next 5 days. And I'm actually just reading this here from the National Hurricane Center website. And it's just located a few hundred miles south of the Cabo Verde Islands. And it's producing some showers and thunderstorms, which is what tropical waves typically do. We'll continue to watch that. I'm not overly concerned about it at this time, but something that popped up there here in the almost middle portions of October. Typically, we don't look toward Africa for late October storms to develop, but obviously not out of the question. Dan?
Yeah, absolutely not. Also, too, the Pacific has some activity as well. You've got Norbert, which is because it became a tropical depression. Now, those aren't going to really affect anything. They're kind of out in the eastern Pacific and moving westward. But we only got two more storms to tie 2005, Epsilon, Zeta. Those are the names that we got to in 2005, and that's 6 letters in the Greek alphabet. And we're not far away with Delta being the 4th. And now we've got another wave to watch, and the hurricane season doesn't end until the end of November. So are we going to tie or break that record? Well, time will tell, but we obviously don't want that record to be broken, but definitely a one for the record books this hurricane season in the Atlantic in 2020.
All right, the next question we have is coming in from Heather Van. Again, use the hashtags on your screen, hashtag Hey Dan, hashtag Hey JB, hashtag Hey Amanda, and Heather here asking, hashtag Hey Dan, hashtag Hey JB, why are all these storms heading straight to Louisiana all the time this season? And Dan, I would imagine people in Louisiana, folks in Louisiana, are asking the same exact question.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to do with hurricanes move from steering currents, and the steering currents are subtle. It's typically around a ridge of high pressure. You call it the Bermuda High, and with the conditions that we've been under and the pattern that we've been in, and hats off to the Hurricane Center and the National Hurricane Center, because at the beginning of the year, they put out their hurricane forecast, and they said there is a very good probability that there will be above average activity. And it has to do with the placement of that Bermuda High. And so essentially a high pressure system with clockwise circulation around the high in the northern hemisphere, that's centered over Bermuda. And so these storms ride underneath that ridge of high pressure, if you can envision this, on the south side of that Bermuda High. And then as that high kind of strengthens to the west, it deflects the hurricane a little more westerly. And now what we're going to see, and which is happening right now with Delta, it's lifting more northward. And the reason it's moving northward is it's on the west side of that Bermuda High. And so that's just the way it's been this year, that these systems have ridden around the ridge of high pressure, the Bermuda High, and unfortunately for the folks in Louisiana, it is steering it right smack dab into the central coast. Now, if there's one takeaway with this, I think that Cameron, Louisiana might be a little bit to the west of the center of circulation. And while, it's still a hurricane, it's still strong, and it'll still be damaging, I think the majority of the impact, in my opinion, is going to be kind of in those marsh reserves, still somewhat populated. But I think with the shear coming in and the track shifting eastward a little bit, we'll see how it pans out. But I think it might be a little east of Cameron by maybe about tens of miles, which makes a difference.
I'm going to ask this next question. Amanda, maybe you can control the graphics here on screen. And Dan, if you could maybe answer this question, because this is actually a little bit closer to you than it is to us here in Florida. Jessica Piper asking, #Hey Amanda, is this storm going to hit Kentucky?
So it's not going to hit Kentucky, Jessica, as, a major Category 3 storm. Are the remnants, what's left of the circulation, what's left of the moisture going to move into Kentucky? That's pretty likely. But even as we get into Sunday and into the Monday timeframe, looks like we're going to be dealing with a remnant area of low pressure with some still gusty winds and some of that moisture being brought in. But this is something that, you guys can handle. You've dealt with this before there in Kentucky. And you guys will be on the northern side of the system as well, which is good news because you won't deal with as many quick spin-ups of those isolated tornadoes that we talk about sometimes too. So the moisture headed in your direction, yes, but not a major hurricane.
And the next question that we have here coming in is from, make sure I have it here on my screen, and we're going to throw it over to Chief Meteorologist Dan Scoff. #Hey Dan from Dory Guidry from KLFY's Facebook page. I'd love to see some more comments from KLFY just because of where they are located geographically here in relation to this storm. #Hey Dan, what is the impact for Lafayette, Louisiana?
Yeah, I know you had that same question at, the 1 o'clock track in the tropics. And Lafayette is going to get impacts, not necessarily the storm surge because that's more inland, although there could be some, local tributaries and some of the areas that could be getting a minor storm surge. But there are going to be wind impacts from Lafayette. I think this center of circulation goes right over, and we have to remember it's now a Category 3. So, and it may be, as Amanda mentioned, maybe close to a Category 3, if not right at Category 3 status, depending on the intensity forecast, if they're accurate, as it makes its way in. While it will weaken rapidly, Lafayette will get wind damage, I think. There's going to be power outages. I think you're going to experience heavy rain. Also, you're going to be most likely on the east side of the circulation, so you will have to deal with tornado warnings with those feeder bands that come in from the tropical system. And so I would definitely prepare for impacts and potentially major impacts. And another thing that was mentioned too last time on Tracking the Tropics is these people are still recovering. I mean, if you look, there are blue tarps all over the place, and only a little bit of wind will take those blue tarps and rip them off of the rooftops. And next thing you know, you got water pouring down into a home. While it might not be catastrophic for structural integrity, that can definitely compromise a home's, basically anything that's inside. So these are things that people are going to have to deal with, unfortunately.
Next question coming in from Garen Danner from WKRG's Facebook page there in coastal Alabama. #Hey Amanda, I'm late to this post. What is the expected location of landfall of Delta? And, I brought this question up here specifically from Garen because I think the track shifted so slightly to the west, Amanda, here in this 5 o'clock update, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it shifted very much here at all. If anything, we've actually seen a narrowing of this cone because we're getting closer to the landfall event. So we're getting, again, more confident on where this thing, the eye, will make landfall and move ashore. And I'll zoom in here on the graphics, and it looks like anywhere between Port Arthur and New Iberia, still kind of under the gun, still in the cone. So again, the center of the storm can kind of move ashore in any of those locations. That's what the cone is for. Impacts, of course, being felt outside of that cone, but landfall anywhere along the Texas, Louisiana border, all the way over to just south of Lafayette is possible.
Next question. Some of these Louisiana parishes and towns and communities are, Amanda's smiling because she knows exactly what I'm going to say. They're hard to pronounce,
Yes.
but Tiral Zeno, hashtag Hey Dan. Hey Dan, I remember this one from our previous coverage. I believe it was of Hurricane. It wasn't Sally. Was it Laura? It was Laura. Correct, Laura. Nakatoshis. I think I got that right.
It sounds good.
I think it's Nakatoshis, but I could be mistaken. For all of our Louisiana viewers, please let me know if I butchered this or not. But hashtag Hey Dan, how is that looking? Of course, Nakatoshis, if I am pronouncing that correctly, is I'm trying to just kind of paint a picture. It's kind of northwest of kind of halfway between Alexandria and Shreveport. So, Dan, maybe we can answer Terrell's question here.
Yeah, what I think we're going to see with Delta and the Hurricane Center agrees, and I'm sure Amanda has been talking about the shear. Now, when we say shear, we're talking about fast winds aloft. We know that there is a weather system. It's bringing clouds right now over our area, and we know there's going to be increased southwesterly flow, meaning jet stream energy. Hurricanes don't like this. They tend to weaken very rapidly because you don't have that outflow, essentially, high pressure over the hurricane. And so once they start encountering shear, they're not as symmetric. You're going to see with Delta, a lot of the activity and what we call a central dense overcast will be kind of shifted to the east a little bit. And so to answer that question, once this hurricane makes landfall, I think it's going to take a hard right and start curving more northeast. And so I think that you are going to be on the northwest side in that parish, northwest of Alexandria, and Nacogdoches. I think you're gonna see that area where you'll see some wind. It's going to be wind out of the north most likely. There will be some gusty winds, but definitely not as strong as east of the circulation. And if you've ever wondered that, some people have had that question, why is the east side of the circulation of the storm? If you know mathematics and you're doing vectors, you can add those two vectors, the wind speed and the forward motion, as opposed to having the wind speed that's against the forward motion, and that's why the winds are a little weaker on the west side of the circulation. So I hope that answers your question. You'll get some rain and you'll definitely get some wind. It probably won't be as bad as the Alexandria area, in my opinion.
Dan, I'm going to have to bring up Amanda and myself. I have to fall on my sword here. I see KLFY's Facebook page comment section, and they're all laughing at me. I see that people have been kind enough to correct me here, because I did. I absolutely butchered it. It is Nakatish. Hopefully I have that correct for all the viewers. We're here, of course, over in Florida in your hurricane headquarters, so a little bit far away from there in Louisiana. Nakatish, I think, was the correct pronunciation. This next one is going to be hopefully a little bit easier for me to pronounce. I'm throwing this one over to Amanda. Kimberly Landry from WFLA. Hashtag Hey Dan, what conditions can I expect in Acadia Parish north of I-10?
So it looks like Acadia Parish, they're going to be under the gun. You guys are going to see some of the strongest winds that will move ashore, whether this comes ashore as a weaker Category 3 storm or a strong Category 2 with those wind speeds. Some of those winds, those really strong winds, they're going to make their way inland, and you guys are going to kind of be right over that strongest part of the storm. So definitely prepare for some very strong winds. Prepare for some very heavy rain as well. Now, I believe the Acadia Parish is a little inland, so storm surge may not, I don't think storm surge will be an issue for you there in the Acadia Parish. But again, the strong winds, the very heavy rainfall, certainly preparing for that as this storm moves ashore.
I'm going to throw this next question over to Amanda here as well. Hashtag Hey Amanda from Con Bauer Ingram from WGNO's Facebook page. We're monitoring those comments there as well in New Orleans. A lot of other Facebook pages that we're going to be getting to, different comment sections. Hashtag Hey Amanda, can this one go more east at this point like the last storm did with hitting Florida, of course, referencing Hurricane Sally?
Yeah, so I would say there's always a chance that, we could see slight shifts to the east or shifts to the west, but for the past several days, these forecast models, the track models that we have been looking at, the spaghettis, they don't look like spaghetti anymore because they are tuned in to where this storm is going to go. We have a very good idea, and because we've had many runs now of these lines, these forecast models being in the exact same location, that gives us very high confidence of where the center will move ashore. And that's why the cone, the National Hurricane Center's cone, is so small at this point as well, because the chances of this moving are very low, very low.
Next question that we have coming in, it's for KNWA Chief Meteorologist Dan Scoff joining us here, everybody, on Track in the Tropics. Zachary Amy from KLFY, hashtag Hey Dan, will wind shear play a factor in the track and strength of Hurricane Delta?
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of hinted at that before, but to answer your question, wind shear is a key component to the strength of a hurricane. And that wind shear is also going to play a pivotal role on making that Hurricane Delta asymmetric, meaning the east side of the center of circulation, you're going to see kind of just like with Sally. Sally had a tremendous feeder band and all of that precipitation that was blasting the Florida Panhandle. And then you got farther west, and there was very limited rain and thunderstorm activity. So wind shear definitely plays a role, not only in the strength, but also in the track. And something else too that's kind of interesting is we have to remember that even though that Delta's moving pretty fast, sometimes these hurricane eyes can wobble. Now, whether it has a wall when it comes ashore remains to be seen. But a wobble is essentially just a little bit of a deviation in the track. But if you think about that wobble, 10, 15 miles, it can make a tremendous difference as to the impact, such as in Cameron Parish, Lake Charles, that area. If it wobbles even farther east, then, it's basically south of Lafayette. So those are going to play pivotal roles. And sometimes that wobble can occur because you get a weakening of the winds along the land because of friction, and you have a strengthening of the winds to the south side of the eye, and that can tend to where you have the predominant winds are more westerly, that can take that eye and wobble it a little bit. I've seen it before, and I've seen a lot of research on wobbles and hurricane tracks. Interesting stuff.
Kitty May from KLFY, we're going to throw this one right back over to you, Dan. Hashtag Hey Dan. From Crowley here, what should we expect? Crowley, not too far away from Lake Charles, Lafayette, that area, Dan, right there on the I-10 corridor of coastal Louisiana.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the areas that got one of the worst storm surge too from Laura. It was a little east of Cameron. A lot of people said, I've heard it before, and I've even seen comments saying, wow, the storm surge wasn't quite 17 feet. But there was a gauge that did measure 17.1 feet. It's just that wobble, that turn, made all the difference in the world as to why, Cameron Parish and that area didn't get affected quite as much with that heavy storm surge. But that's a little farther east of Cameron, so I think there's going to be more impacts there. I still think that's going to be close to the center of the eye, but maybe on just the western side of the eye. What we can hope for is that this kind of moves through that Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge, which, is still populated, but somewhat less than Cameron Parish and other areas such as Pecan Island.
We're going to throw this, the next two questions, you guys, we're going to throw up actually for both of our meteorologists. This is a last call for questions. By the way, we only have another 5 or so minutes here on Track in the Tropics. If you would like for your question to be answered, use the hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyAmanda, hashtag HeyDan. Again, another 5 or so minutes here on Track in the Tropics as we get to some of your last questions. We're trying to get to as many of them as we can across as many Facebook pages as we can. Let's get to this. I want to bring up Dan and Amanda for these next two. Pat from KLFY, hashtag Hey Dan. Is it rare for a hurricane to hit the same location twice? And it's not as rare as you'd think, right, Amanda, Dan?
Definitely not as rare as you would think, but maybe in the same season, definitely a lot rarer as compared to when we go back with all of our records and we see these landfalling hurricanes. In the same season, the chances have got to be very low. I'll be honest, I don't know the exact percentage or how often it has happened. Maybe Dan, more than I do on that one.
The saying goes, does lightning strike twice in the same place? Well, in this case, do hurricanes strike twice in the same place?
It does in 2020, unfortunately. It seems like all bets are off with this year. But yeah, as Amanda just said, that we have it's a different scenario when you have it in the same year. Now you look at tracks and you can see tracks moving over the same area because, over time you have a greater probability of a hurricane striking the same place. I really hope and pray that this does not move through the Cameron area, because that was decimated, and the damage was devastating from Laura, and they're still recovering and they're still ongoing with relief efforts. And so it would just be a worst case scenario that this moves a little farther west. And then you've got in Lafayette, you've got the tornado potential east of there, and we'll see how much thunderstorm activity develops east of the center of circulation. But looking at it, there are some outer bands, and you can see that on the satellite, that there's thunderstorms that are developing around the central dense overcast, which is that white area that you see on the screen. And that's essentially on the visible satellite, that's the coldest cloud top. That's the biggest thunderstorm. And those outer bands are the ones that have the tornadoes. So you've got all threats. So wind, rain, and tornado potential, unfortunately. So we'll see. But to answer that question, I don't think it happens very often in the same year, for sure.
Jimmy King, KTVE's Facebook page, hashtag Amanda, is South Arkansas going to see any high winds from Delta? And, of course, throwing you guys back up here on screen because Dan joining us from Arkansas.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad as Hurricane Laura was when it makes its way through the Arkansas area, because as Dan will say as well, we're not looking at this center coming nearly as close. Dan talked about it earlier. We're going to see this turn a little bit quicker than Laura did, meaning most of Arkansas is going to be on the northwestern side of the storm. It's going to be on the weaker side. And as you talked about earlier too, Dan, we're going to see this shear kind of push most of the convection onto the eastern side, which will leave Arkansas possibly a little bit drier.
Especially our area, western Arkansas, we're contemplating on the rain chances tomorrow. We got 20-30%. I think some of those outer bands that come in and a little energy from the west might spark off a few showers. We're talking a few hundredths of an inch. I mean, this is a non-event for us in northwest Arkansas, in the River Valley, and in our market. In central Arkansas, you got a little more rain, but I think southeastern Arkansas the main threat will be probably flash flooding, I think, with this storm coming through. And the winds are not going to be as strong as Laura. I totally agree with the track being farther east. So Arkansas is going to be seeing impacts depending on where you live. Southeast Arkansas will probably see the most, closest to the center.
Robert Young, KLFY's Facebook page, hashtag Amanda. How long will the storm last? It's a really great question, because the slower the storm moves over an area, of course, the more devastating of an impact it can have. Robert Young here joining us from Fort Polk, there just north of Lake Charles.
So the storm's going to be picking up forward motion. Earlier, I talked about that forward motion slowing down. That's what we're going to expect going into tonight and early tomorrow morning. But as the center of the storm approaches land, it's actually going to pick up that forward motion once again and speed up. So we're not talking about a very long-lived event here, and I've put on the track so you can kind of see exactly the time frames from the National Hurricane Center. I think landfall is going to happen late tomorrow afternoon and early evening. And then by the time we get to Saturday morning, the center of the storm and most of the showers, the thunderstorms, and the strongest winds, those are going to be moving out of Louisiana. So that's good news for you guys there. Less than a 24-hour time frame here.
Dan, you want to hop in here?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that this storm, one thing I do want to mention, though, that, and we kind of experienced it with Laura, it might not weaken as fast as thought, because this is something that I thought of, marshland, extremely saturated, and hurricanes feed on this fuel. Now, the ocean temperatures are definitely a little cooler along the Louisiana coast, but that also can cause some weakening. We haven't really mentioned that. We're a little bit below that fuel 80-degree level, and so that might tend to weaken it. It's a little cooler than it normally should be south of Louisiana, so that might help some weakening the shear as well. But maybe that saturated ground, and we'll see how this plays out, might allow that hurricane to last just a little bit longer and then finally wind down as it moves into central Louisiana. It's something to see, because that did happen with Laura. It took a little while for Laura to wind down.
Yeah, and we're going to see, the forward motion pick up too. So it's going to kind of bring some of those stronger winds farther inland just because it's moving so fast.
Next question. Well, actually, you know what, everybody, we're gonna end out on this. If you can give me just another second here, because there were a lot of communities that we were unable to get to here on this edition of Track in the Tropics. There's, of course, we always leave, unfortunately, so many questions unanswered, and that's why we do as many editions of Track in the Tropics here as possible. And I just want to bring up again KLFY's Facebook page. I mean, everyone here telling me Nakatish. Or Nakodish. I mean, that's the correct pronunciation.
I learned something new today, too. I don't know all those parishes. I remember when I covered Katrina back in 2005, I was hearing all these parishes that were called out. And, that's good to know.
Yeah, so Dan here is joining us from Northwest Arkansas. Amanda and I are in your hurricane headquarters in the state of Florida. We cannot know the pronunciation of every town and community across the southeastern United States. Here are some other ones that we weren't unable to get to here. I think Morgan City, pretty self-explanatory. I believe that's Corencro. And Amanda, you want to try the last one here? You want to give it a shot? I'm going to put you on the spot here. Opelousas? Man, some difficult pronunciations here that we were unable to get to some of these locations. These were starting to build up here in the comment section as we were about to wrap up the show, as we are doing now. But Dan, any perspective here?
I actually, our stream's a little behind, so I'm just going to say I can't see it and plead the fifth on that.
You know, we appreciate, though, you guys wanting us to pronounce them right. Of course, everyone's locations, Absolutely. Their towns, you know, they matter to them. And everywhere in the United States has those interesting names and interesting pronunciations. So we try to get them right here. The most important part, though, we want you guys to be prepared for the storm that is coming in. I think the southern half of Louisiana, you guys need to prepare for some of those stronger winds, those isolated tornadoes, the coastline. Of course, the storm surge threat there, not going to be as high as it was with Hurricane Laura, but it is going to be another impact with potentially a major hurricane moving ashore in about 24 hours from now.
Corinne Crow apparently got right, according to KLFY's Facebook page that I'm currently monitoring here on my screen. And the one that you pronounced with the O that I'm not even going to try because I will butcher it just like I did Nakatish. You also got that right, according to our KLFY Facebook fans here joining us on Track in the Tropics. Really appreciate all the Facebook pages that we've been monitoring here on this edition of Track in the Tropics. We are continuously tracking and monitoring every step of the way here. Hurricane Delta as it gets closer to the Louisiana coast, some of the communities here that we were just talking about. We are going to be live with more editions of Track in the Tropics here from your hurricane headquarters in the hours ahead to keep you aware and safe and alert to the very latest information that we have from the National Hurricane Center. I'd like to thank Dan Scott for joining us from Northwest Arkansas. And of course, meteorologist Amanda Holly, routinely here on Track in the Tropics. I'm JB Buno. Really appreciate it here, folks, joining us here. And we'll be back with more editions of Track in the Tropics in the hours and days ahead. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.